Toronto police are actually enforcing the law. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. If you're like me and you saw the footage of Toronto police yesterday breaking up a tent city and arresting squatters and protesters, it might have seemed a little shocking. In this day and age, we don't often see the police actually doing their work and enforcing the law, especially if it involves the use of force. Well, to help us make sense of this news story, I'm joined by True North contributor Sue-Ann Levy. Sue-Ann is an expert on this topic. She's been writing about it for a very, very long time, and she has a new piece up at tnc.news. So, Sue-Ann, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome, Candice.
So, can you walk us through what happened yesterday? Because for me, I just saw that Toronto police were trending on Twitter. I looked at some of the videos and I saw, a lot of people on the left, these sort of usual suspects, really truly outraged by what they saw. And I think it was perhaps a little out of context, because if you didn't know anything about what was going on in these encampments and you just thought, the Toronto police showed up one day and decided to bust all these tents, it could seem shocking. So maybe you can help provide a little bit of context and explain what exactly happened yesterday.
What happened yesterday, or what's been happening over the last year? Because these encampments, I guess they grew and festered. And pardon me for the use of the word fester, but they were horrific. And few journalists went into these encampments, but I spent a lot of time in the last year going into them. They grew and proliferated when COVID started in I guess March, April of 2020. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, cropped up this group called the Encampment Support Network. And these people started delivering water, and it started very innocuously. They delivered water to the people living in the encampments. Now, the big ones were in downtown Toronto, one at Trinity Bellwoods Park, a huge one at Trinity Bellwoods Park, one at Alexander Park, which is the Dundas Bathurst area. Moss Park was another one, and Lamport Stadium Park, which are the four that are being targeted for being cleaned out. Well, the activists from the Encampment Support Network, that this group grew by leaps and bounds as the months went on. And it became obvious to me because I spent considerable time in Alexander Park, Trinity Bellwoods. I was at Lamport Stadium Park doing interviews. It became obvious to me that their agenda was basically to keep these people in the parks and to enable them in whatever way they could to keep them in the park by providing them with free tents, brand new tents with, of course, water, food. I even heard stories of Uber Eats delivering food to these encampments in Alexander Park, even providing them with ways to keep themselves warm. I'm not sure if they delivered heaters, but they sure helped them. I saw people chopping wood in these parks. And so it grew, and the conditions got more and more squalid as the year went on. And, the city council, the Toronto City Council and the mayor enabled these people to stay in the parks, enabled the activists to do what they did, and because they screamed loudly, and which led us up to the last couple of weeks when the parks were finally cleared. The activists, as I feel, have used the homeless as pawns over the last 20 years that I've been covering this. They were very upset that these parks were being cleared because they didn't have their people in the parks to make a statement. And the statement is that they want housing. No matter how unaffordable it is, these people need a roof over their heads. That's just basically their agenda. So you can imagine, Candice, when the police started coming in and actually doing their jobs and cleaning out these parks, these activists were upset. They were upset they didn't have their showpieces to show the world what a terrible job all levels of government have done.
Well, it's really interesting. I have a couple questions. The first is, who's funding these groups? How are they paying for these tents, this food, all this kind of thing? And then the other one was, yesterday when we saw the police breaking down the tents and removing the protesters, they were sort of creating human shields, and the police just seemed like they had enough. How did all these people know to be at that park at that time?
Well, they're very well organized. That's the thing. And over the year, as they've grown, if you go on their Instagram page, they're called Encampment Support Network. They have an Instagram page and they have a Twitter page, and they use social media, and they do a shout out. So yesterday, the day before, they had a shout out. They had a shout out to people to come down and help them, be there at 5 a.m., meet greeters with yellow ribbons around them to get their marching orders. This is what they've done consistently. Now, this started in May when the police tried to clean out for the first time Lamport Stadium Park, which was what we saw yesterday, the same park. They showed up, not in as great numbers, but they managed to hold off a bulldozer that was trying to clean up the park back then. And very shortly after, the homeless returned. Now, I'm sure it was with the help of the activists, but the activists are organized. They have a group of people, doctors, lawyers, academics who support them, and they've used the courts to try to hold the city off. But this is standard, sort of their standard MO, and this has been used in other cities like Seattle. I mentioned the column today, Portland, Venice Beach, where the activists, it's all the same kind of template, where they shout and scream, use the courts, gather prominent people in the in law and doctors and academics. And then, of course, you've got the media who never go down to the parks. I was the only one over the course of the year, pretty much, never went and saw what the conditions were like, and then suddenly show up yesterday and think, oh my God, horror of horrors, and never talk to the people who are affected by the encampments around the parks, the neighbors, the people who are trying to use the parks over the last year.
Well, it's interesting. We had another journalist from True North go down to Lamport Park and was told by a police officer that a very small fraction of the people there yesterday were the actual homeless people living in the tents, right. That the overwhelming majority, like 90%, were these activists that showed up. Now, you mentioned that the goal was to have affordable housing for these individuals. I was under the impression that the police were offering, or the city and the police were offering hotel rooms for people who are living in these parks. Can you explain that a little bit?
That was the great irony over the last year. Pretty much a year, because the mayor and council rented these extremely expensive hotel rooms in major hotels, including the Novotel down on the Esplanade. People living beside it were horrified because it was a upscale hotel, and they rented rooms. Every homeless person gets their own room, 3 square meals a day, 2 snacks, and they have TVs in the room, Wi-Fi, that kind of thing. And the activists will tell you that it's unsafe there. Well, I can't imagine that it's more unsafe to be in your own hotel room than being in an encampment where there was drug dealing, rats, horrible garbage, fires. The number of fires increased by 250% in the last year. The conditions were it was squalor. I was mortified when I went to Alexandra Park a couple of weeks ago and saw what had happened to the park because of these encampments.
I've stayed at the Novotel, not that one in Toronto, but I've stayed at the one in Ottawa, and it's a very nice hotel. It's very upscale. And so when you went through the names of the parks, we have Trinity Bellwoods, which is in a very upscale, sort of family-friendly part of Toronto. It's in the West End, sort of Queen West. It's a hipster area, but there are a lot of houses around there in Little Italy. And then, same thing with Moss Park over in Regent Park. They tried to gentrify it and have more families there. I used to live very close to Alexandra Park. It's at Bathurst and Dundas. I used to live down at Bathurst and King. And I know I probably wouldn't take my kids to those parks today, but in the past, certainly I've taken my son to Trinity Bellwoods Park before because it's a beautiful park. There's a great little playground down there. I just don't understand these activists. Don't they worry about the livability of the city, the ability of families and, parents with young children to be able to enjoy the park as well? I can't imagine any parent wanting to take a child to a park where there's a homeless encampment growing bigger and bigger and bigger and taking up more and more of the space. Did you ever ask, or did you ever sort of see the dichotomy between families and these activists?
Oh yeah, I heard from a lot of people because they quickly found out that I was really one of the only people in the media writing about it. So a lot of people reached out to me and with their frustrations. It was affecting businesses down on Queen Street as well. And, a perfect example was Alexander Park. There is a brand new condo that borders on the south end of the park. And there were fires, outrageous fires last fall and winter. And these people were really worried that the fire was going to extend to their properties. They showed me pictures of fire extinguishers. By the way, the activists gave the tent people fire extinguishers as well. There was they provided me with pictures of fire extinguishers being thrown at windows on their property by drug addicted encampment residents. When I went down to Alexander Park a couple of weeks ago, it was a beautiful June day. There was not a soul in there in terms of kids, families. One person was walking her dog through the park, but from what I understand, they were afraid to walk their dogs through there. And no, I can't blame them because from what I saw, it was a pretty frightening. I'm used to it, but it was a pretty frightening thing to see.
Well, it's really sad. I'll say this. I grew up in Vancouver and we're very used to these homeless encampments, but Vancouver also has a lot of parks. So, there are certain parks that are occupied by homeless people. I would just never go there. But, they have so many parks in Vancouver that it sort of makes up for it. You can find safe areas where you can take your family. Toronto, I would say, has a very limited number of parks. They already have a problem in that sort of very inner part of the city that there isn't a lot of green space. There's not a lot of places to go. So it's really sad that these few spaces were overtaken. I know you don't have much time and I want to be respectful. So I'll just ask one last question to you, Sue-Ann. What was the notice like? So, if you were just watching on social media, it sort of just seemed like the police just decided to show up one day and bust up these camps. But the reality is that they have been posting notice for, I believe, weeks, if not months. Can you sort of walk us through the process up until yesterday to the point where the police finally said enough is enough? Everybody has to go.
Well, they posted notices many, many times. And the great irony was that they would post these notices and then not act on them. So I think the activists felt that, they could get away with it. They were taken to court by the activists last fall. And the city won. Basically, the activists tried to get an injunction that the city couldn't clear the parks. And the city won. Or the injunction was not granted. So from last fall, the city had the right to clear the parks. They knew that this was a possibility, but they figured if they screamed loud enough, they would continue to have their way. Well, for the most recent, eviction, they posted trespass notices on June 12th at all 4 parks. And the activists will freely admit that. They say that on their social media channels. However, I guess they thought that the city would back down yet again. And they actually, got, some reprieve at Lamport Stadium because when they tried to clear it in May, they only got the job half done and then more people returned. Obviously, more people returned because they had to clear it again yesterday. So, the city is to blame in large part because they enabled this to happen over the last year, to grow, to not follow through on their threats and to ignore the people who were suffering from COVID and needed a little bit of green space and couldn't access their local parks.
Absolutely. Well, Sue-Ann, unfortunately, I think that some of these videos are going to lead the defund the police crowd to have even more ammo for their fight. Yeah. But I still think it's a good day when police are doing their job, enforcing the law, and moving people out so that everyone else in the city can enjoy these spaces that are supposed to be public and supposed to be for everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and providing so much context to this important story, Sue-Ann.
Oh, you're welcome. Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show.